everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Our topics for tonight are a chaos scheme in Syria and a ridiculous U.S. debt ceiling crisis. It is ridiculous. So easy to solve. So let's get started. Hi, Steve Wolfbrand. How are you? I'll get started with the first of our articles, one by Pepe Escobar on Syria. The name of the article is Anarchy in the Levant. Your future dream is a chaos scheme. The author, of course, is Pepe Escobar. It appeared at UNS Review, uns.com. Otherwise known as unz.com. And it's dated today, December 19th. And here's a photo of jubilant Syrian people declaring their freedom. Caption under it says, Tehran and Moscow harbor no illusions and are preparing accordingly. The war on BRICS is just getting started. Pepe begins, Syria, as we knew it, is being eviscerated in real time. In geographic, cultural, economic, and military terms, by an appalling confluence of mercenary, rent-a-jihadi mobs and psychopathological genocidals praying at the altar, of Eretz Israel. I realize I haven't taken the time to share this yet on Facebook, so if you'll excuse me for a second, I'll do that before I come back. Okay, here I am. It's shared now. So I'll get back to Pepe. Syria, as we knew it, is being eviscerated in real time, in geographic, cultural, economic, and military terms, by an appalling confluence of mercenary, rent-a-jihadi mobs and psychopathological genocidals praying at the altar of Eretz Israel. All of that is fully supported by rabid NATO-stan hyenas, masters of narrative control, and fully intertwined with the eradication, of Palestine. Across the avowedly dejected global majority is a feeling that the momentarily exhausted axis of resistance will need to go turbo-Sisyphus to rearrange, resupply, and recalibrate the defense of Palestine. Predictably, there's not a peep across the NATO-stan sphere about Tel Aviv's feral, indiscriminate bombing and snatching of sovereign Syrian territory. That represents a glaring illustration of the, quote, rules-based international order, unquote, in action. Collective West think tank land is in rapture. Chatham House preaches Assyrian rebuilding in this, quote, watershed moment, unquote, led by the US, the EU, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, capable of, quote, forging a consensus around Syria, unquote, that, quote again, could serve as the foundation for a new regional order, unquote. The rabidly anti-BRICS Center for a New American Security demands, quote, expelling Russia's military presence, unquote, from Syria, and, quote, to close the country as an avenue for Iran's power protection, unquote. The axis of resistance is being mourned across the spectrum. Not so fast, says Pepe. The deeper meaning of the, quote, ceasefire, unquote, between Israel and Hezbollah is that the psychopathologicals, for all practical purposes, were defeated, even if they wreaked horrendous havoc on southern Lebanon and Beirut's suburbs. Changing the narrative and the focus to the greater Idlibistan offensive allowed an avowedly massive tactical victory, not only for Eretz Israel goons, but for the assembled NATO-Stan Turkey combo. Yet the real nitty-gritty starts now, even as the partition of Syria is already in effect. The rent a jihadi mob, in theory, under the control of the aspiring the Caliph of al-Sham, the Saudi al-Jolani. According to my research, he's a Syrian and not a Saudi, but could be Pepe has better information. Real name, Ahmad Ibrahim al-Shah, sooner or later may turn against the Eretz Israel project, considering they entertain cozy relations with Hamas in Gaza. At least for the moment, everything is swell for the Oded Yinon and or Bernard Lewis plan to subdue West Asia via time-tested divide and rule. This harks back not only to Sykes-Picot in 1917, but even earlier to 1906, when Prime Minister Henry Campbell Bannerman asserted that there are people, Arabs, who control spacious territories teeming with manifest and hidden resources. They dominate the intersections of world routes. Their lands were the cradle of human civilizations and religions, unquote. So, if these, quote, people, unquote, united, they would then, quote, again, take the fate of the world into its hands and would separate Europe from the rest of the world, unquote. Ergo, the necessity of, quote, a foreign body, unquote, later constituted as Israel, to be, quote, planted in the heart of this nation to prevent the convergence of its wings in such a way that could exhaust its powers in never-ending wars. It could also serve as a springboard for the West to maintain its never-ending springboard for the West to gain its coveted military objects, unquote. The next section is called Pirates of the Levant. The Eretz Israel hallucination does not exactly mingle with Sultan Erdogan's neo-Ottoman dream, even though they coincide in the broader urge to redraw the map of the Eastern Mediterranean and West Asia. As for the exceptionalists, I guess that's us, they can barely believe their luck. In a swoop, they just gobbled up the key strategic node of a now buried idea, uh, Arabism or anti imperialism in the Levant. Ever since Barack Obama in the early 2010s declared war on Syria under orders from Tel Aviv, the empire of chaos had thrown everything in the kitchen sink at Damascus for at least 13 years, the longest and most expensive regime change campaign in U.S. history, complete with toxic forced starvation sanctions until suddenly the big prize fell on their lap. The prize involves, in theory, smashing an ally of three top BRICS, Russia, Iran, and China, with the added bonus of turning it into a geoeconomic black hole, while doctoring the narrative to sell, quote, the end of the dictator, unquote, to the global majority as the precondition for the rise of a new Dubai. We still don't know how rump Syria will look like, and even for how long it will be governed by a bunch of neoliberal Salafi jihadis with trimmed beards and cheap new off-the-rack suits. Pepe, very funny. The fact is the hegemon is already controlling at least a third of Syrian territory for at least a decade and will continue to steal Syrian oil and wheat with absolute impunity. Pirates of the Levant in full regalia, playing the role of sidekick. The UK's MI6 will continue to excel in providing PR ops across the board, lobbying and gun running opportunities for the gullible motley crew of mercenary Salafi-jihadis. When it comes to Tel Aviv, they're destroying Eretz Israel's largest remaining Arab military opposition, stealing, annexing land nonstop, and dreaming of total domination, aerial and naval, in case Russia loses its bases in Tartus and Khmeimim. That's a major, quote, if, unquote. Not to mention they somewhat indirectly control the new caliph, who as meekly asked them to please don't conquer too much Syrian land. The partition will proceed along three other major vectors. One, hegemon-controlled land and military bases, which might be used to attack Iraq. Forget about a fake sovereign Syria recovering their oil fields. Two, Turkey-annexed land, which will inevitably lead to the full absorption of Aleppo, already proclaimed by the Sultan on the record. Sultan, of course, is Erdogan, the would-be Sultan of the expanded Turkey. Three, Damascus run by an ISIS offshoot, directly manipulated by Turkish intel. All of the above might lead already in the first quarter of 2025 to a sort of Salafi jihadi Zionization arrangement with just one objective: to ease sanctions from the US and the EU. As for al-Jilani, real name Ahmad Ibrahim al-Shah, for all his woke rebranding, he was al-Zarqawi's lieutenant and the emir of Nineveh during the al-Qaeda in Iraq, AQI, later reconverted as ISIS, rampage in Mesopotamia. There's no way Baghdad will have political relations with the Salafi jihadi who's on Iraq's most wanted list. An additional headache is the EU's conditions for normalizing Syria, as spelled out by the unelected, batshit crazy Estonian responsible for its foreign policy and representing nearly 500 million European citizens. Brussels will only lift sanctions if there are no Russian bases, unquote, Russian influence, unquote, left in the Caliphate of al-Sham. Meanwhile, the Empire of Chaos will continue its plunder in conjunction with Israel. The Syrian oil, stolen by Americans, is sold by the Kurds to Israel in Erbil with a huge discount. After all, this oil is, quote, free, unquote, as in stolen. At least 40% of Israel's oil comes from the Erbil racket. And it gets worse. Israel has annexed the Al-Wada Dam in the basin of the Yarmouk River, close to the city of Al-Qusair in the Daraa Governorate and near the Jordanian border. This dam provides at least 30% of Syria's water and 40% of Jordan's water. Everything is so predictable. What the NATO stand/Israel combo really wants is an amputated, disaggregated, vulnerable Syria. The Empire of Chaos goes full of anarchy. Yet the whole toxic equation, says Pepe, is far from over. Aspiring Caliph Jolani may be tempted to allow Russia to keep its bases and to transport their weapon systems out of the country intact. He is in close contact with Moscow, and HTS is de facto protecting Russian assets. In parallel, Hezbollah signaled it is willing to, quote, cooperate, unquote, with HTS, which, by the way, is also protecting the Iranian embassy in Damascus. There is no evidence whatsoever that the greater Idlibistan invasion was a Trojan horse agreed on a negotiating table by the dead, quote, Astana process, unquote, even before the fateful Doha meeting on Saturday, January 7th. On Saturday, January 7th? Surely on Saturday, December 7th. What is certain is that the analysis in Moscow and Beijing privileges the long, big picture. The Chinese, for now, are extremely circumspect on the record about the whole Syrian drama, apart from declaring themselves, quote, ready to play a constructive role, unquote. Beijing and Moscow see Syria as a temporary setback on BRICS, inflicted by an empire on desperation roll, along with its equally desperate Eretz Israel ally, and a sultan biting more than he can chew. The lame duck Biden combo is absolutely clueless on the emergence of a possible Israeli-Turkish hegemonic vector in a key node of West Asia. The only thing that matters for Straussian neocons and their Tel Aviv psycho-apocalyptic buddies when it comes to the disintegration of Syria is the window of opportunity ahead for Israel to attack Iran. The Times of Israel is in rapture. While previously the, quote, IAF would not fly directly over Damascus when carrying out strikes on Iran-linked targets in the capital, it now can, unquote. The key to unlock the whole riddle may lie once again with Jolani. Everything in West Asia is always in perpetual flux. Only a few days after the fall of Damascus, Sultan Erdogan, as well as NATO, have refused to help Jolani against the Israeli onslaught in Syria. talk about the aspiring caliphate's, quote, sovereignty, unquote. So where Jelani could turn to in a quest for possible allies. And who can he rely on to impose some order in totally disaggregated Syria, including air power to fight ISIS pockets across the desert? Enter Tehran and Moscow. Ergo, the back channels on overdrive. They would not bat an eye when it comes to, quote, cooperating, unquote, with the infant caliphate, as long as their national interests are not threatened. The empire of chaos will remain unmatched in terms of narrative control, PR stunts, also monopolizing social media spheres, and nonstop war. All hybrid fronts, but that's about it. The empire was miserably defeated in both Afghanistan and Iraq, and continues to be humiliated by the Houthis in the Red Sea. Washington is less than zero advantage over Russia on the military sphere, except on electronic warfare, at least on the West Asian theater, NISR, where Russia is catching up, which instantly translates into inflicting more and more terror. As for Iran, it's far from weaker now than before the fall of Damascus. That's imperial narrative spin inbuilt in the self-pleasing exceptionalist uh, um, 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 mechanism. Ayatollah Khamenei, a fine strategist, does not waste his words. Tehran will eventually develop an alternative supply chain to Hezbollah and the West Bank. Besides, follow the money. The Iranian Foreign Ministry has already noted that, quote, the new Syrian government will take on all of Syria's financial obligations to Iran. That's a lot of money that Jolani does not have. Michael Hudson, is adamant, quote, anarchy is what the U.S. plan is, unquote. This being West Asia, where backstabbing is an art, there will be blowback. Tehran and Moscow harbor no illusions and are prepared accordingly. The war on BRICS is just getting started. Now, that I think is a brilliant analysis of what is likely to happen in the short run. The only possible fly, in the ointment is whether Russia is on the sly preparing a response to what happened in Syria. I saw some claim today by, I think it was the Times of India or Hindustan Times, which suggested that Russia was not far from lowering the boom on those creating disorder inside of Syria. I don't know how to take that. It seems to me it may be a rumor started by the media from India. They seem to like to start rumors. But anyway, we shall wait and see. Things are immediately somewhat quiet in West Asia now, except, of course, for a blistering exchange between Ansar Allah, also known as the Houthis, and the Israelis. OD says that she's going to be joining me soon. I hope so. I certainly do hope so. but she's having some technical problems and has been having them. What's been going on is that the Houthis have hit Israel with a ballistic missile, not just Israel, but Tel Aviv, and has sent about 1 million residents scurrying to the shelters. Dr. Joe, where are your glasses? I decided not to wear them tonight because I realize I can see pretty well without my glasses when reading from my computer. The glasses I have don't really correct very well for reading, and I'm out of my very small correction set of reading glasses. They cost about $1, but I have to go to the dollar store to get them. So I've got my reading glasses for up close, but they don't help me to see any better than I see without any correction at all. So I'm going with no correction at all today. Solana says, hi all, please hit the like button. And Steve says, hi Dee and Lana. Lana says, hi Dee and Steve. Steve says, share. Lana says, Dr. Joe, where are your glasses? And Steve, right at the beginning, said, hello, everybody. And thank you, Steve, for coming. So, it's relatively quiet in the Middle East tonight. There's been a lot of commentary on the subject. I've been watching streams all day with commentary on the Middle East. But even though the commentary is very good commentary, I don't think it says much more than what Pepe was able to deliver in that single article. So I'm taking the opportunity of relatively quiet in Western Asia to move over to the domestic sphere, at least for part of tonight. And that means a consideration of the debt limit crisis, which is lighting up some circles with joy right now. And I want to go over that crisis. I will start with a piece from the American Prospect. The name of it is, The Debt Limit Should Actually Be Eliminated. It's a piece by Dave Dayen. The subtitle of which is Trump is Offering the Deal of a Lifetime. This was written today, December 19th, 2024. And here you see a photo of Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader in the House. And he is flanked by his two leaders. One is the person on the right is a member of Congress she's sort of second in command of the leadership, but I've forgotten what position she occupies at this point. Her name is Catherine. I forget her last name also tonight. which is extraordinary for me. And the fellow on the left is Pete Aguilar, and he occupies the position, I believe, of policy director of the caucus, the Democratic caucus. He's fourth in line for the speakership. I think Catherine is actually second in line for the speakership. Or she would be second in line if the Democrats had a majority in the House, but of course they don't. So I guess she's the second ranking of the Democrats. So Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries speaks about raising a debt ceiling during the news crisis today on Capitol Hill. We've gotten a preview of the next 4 years in the space of a few hours on Wednesday. Elon Musk provided the shock troops to topple an end-of-year spending deal, and Donald Trump provided the final blow. To say the commotion was based on rumor and myth would be an insult to rumor and myth. Even now, Trump is calling for a, quote, clean, unquote, funding bill, while keeping the $100 billion in disaster funding and $30 billion for farmers, which comprises virtually all of the additions from a monetary standpoint. But Trump, in other words, all the additions to the CR bill that was presented the other day by the Speaker Johnson, who put a bipartisan deal on the table because of the efforts of Elon Musk and Donald Trump. That deal failed to pass the House in spite of having considerable Democratic support. What Trump wanted in order for him to support the deal was an entirely new demand. Take the debt limit off the table rather than forcing him to deal with it next year. And he doesn't just want the debt limit raised, he explicitly wants it eliminated. The Democrats have said they want to get rid of it. If they want to get rid of it, I would lead the charge, Trump said to NBC News. Dave says, let's not overthink this, regardless of who suggested it. Any day we can say goodbye to the stupidest element of our political structure is a good day, Dave Dayen said. And as you'll see later, I have a tendency to agree. But Dave says, a quick recap. The debt limit is an artificial cap on U.S. borrowing capacity that can only be raised by an act of Congress. The United States had this in place since 1917 and hasn't passed more than a couple of balanced budgets in the ensuing 100-plus years. In other words, a debt limit does nothing to restrain government spending. It only attempts to limit the ability to pay for the inevitable debt incurred from that spending after the decisions have already been made. No other country on earth has this absurd mechanism except Denmark. And the government there managed years ago to raise it higher than it will ever reach, effectively nullifying it. This was a mild nuisance for decades until Barack Obama decided to use the debt limit as leverage for a, quote, grand bargain on deficits. Hey, that's not what happened. What happened is when the Republicans came into office as a result of the incompetence of the Democrats in 2009 and 2010, The Republicans took over the House in 2011, and they decided to use the debt limit, as leverage. That's when the Democrats came forth with a grand bargain, on deficits, because Obama was looking to cut down, on deficits, and his desire to do this was a big role in bargaining with the Republicans, who wanted to cut spending for Democrat constituencies, of course, as they always do. And so there was a good foundation for a grand bargain between them. But it was the Republicans' initial initiative to make the debt limit, an issue that gave rise to the grand bargain shenanigans by Obama and the Republicans in 2011. Tea Party Republicans recognized their good fortune, says Dave. They could threaten to hold the full faith and credit of the U.S. government hostage and cause an international financial crisis if they weren't given a ransom. Dave says, ever since, we've lurched from crisis to crisis whenever Democrats are in power. And of course, when the Republicans are in power, the Democrats never use the debt limit as leverage, because the Democrats never want to shut down the government. They understand they'll be blamed if they try to shut down the government. Democrats' desperate need to be seen as responsible means that the same tactics are never considered when a Republican takes the presidency. And unbelievable, in the rare moments where Democrats have total control in Congress, they've never bothered to defuse this bomb, only to feign surprise when Democrats take the same hostage again. I think he should have said again and again, because they do it again and again. In the last debt ceiling crisis in 2023, Congress suspended the process until January 1st, 2025. Hey, that's a couple of weeks from now. In exchange, less than a couple of weeks from now, isn't it? For a 2-year spending cap, and among other things, an ongoing leakage of IRS enforcement funds that could see nearly all of that money drained. In other words, the ransom deleted a major Democratic agenda item, something that could not have happened without the hostage scenario. I have to add some background here. In the year 2009, there were such large majorities for Democrats that they were in position to get rid of the debt ceiling law completely. Obama never moved against it. I believe, to his everlasting shame, he never moved against it. So in a very real sense, he is to blame for the Republicans having the opportunity to perform a variety of shenanigans since then to extract concessions out of the Democrats. Of course, people will say that was probably because Obama wanted to set up the situation so that they could do those extractions. I agree. That's why I said it's to his everlasting shame. Republicans already had a plan to handle the upcoming expiry of the debt limit with their trifecta next year. Extraordinary measures from the Treasury Department would take the borrowing cap to next summer, and the GOP leadership planned to tuck a debt limit increase into the initial reconciliation package. But Donald Trump is for some reason scared of debt limit increases happening on his watch. Maybe it's because he knows right-wing Republicans will never vote to raise the debt limit, still wrongly believing it to be a shield against runaway spending. Maybe it's because he knows his base aligns with that incorrect argument, including shadow President Elon Musk. Maybe it's because he just doesn't want any limitations on presidential power, Or maybe he actually recognizes that the debt limit is stupid optics that serves no purpose. That's what he said to NBC anyway. He says, doesn't mean anything except psychologically, he said to MSNBC. The solution he stumbled into was just to eliminate the thing. And that would be the absolutely correct solution. Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, and practically one of the only Democrats encouraging the troops to, quote, fight every fight in Congress, unquote. Yet her reaction to Trump's suggestion was immediate, unequivocal. Quote, I agree with President-elect Trump that Congress should terminate the debt limit and never again govern by hostage-taking, unquote. By contrast, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat of New York, idiotically, I add here, chose to connect to Republican efforts to cut Social Security. Quote, GOP extremists want House Democrats to raise the debt ceiling so that House Republicans can lower the amount of your Social Security check, unquote. That's crazy. Where's the link there? But Dave says there's some truth there, but it lazily looks to the customs of how these debt limit fights commonly play out. If the Republican offer is to stick a debt limit increase into whatever end-of-year funding bill they have, then Jeffries is right. Republicans should bear the full burden of passing that, on the theory that you should hand an opposition an anvil at every opportunity. You're not going to get much out of that, though. It's pretty clear that voters don't make their decisions based on who supported a debt limit increase at some point in their congressional career. And Dave is totally right about that. Nobody even notices when Congress raises the debt limits, except for maybe the Peterson Foundation and a few of the think tanks closely related to the Peterson Foundation. They always make a big fuss about it. But that's only important in DC circles. It doesn't get out there to the countryside. People don't care whether the debt limit is increased or not. What they care about is what the government spends the money on, whether the government spends the money on them or spends the money on the oligarchs. That's what people care about. On the other hand, if the offer is to eliminate the debt limit because dear leader Trump said so, Jeffries should co-sponsor that bill. Everyone knows that Democrats aren't going to demand some preservation of Social Security upon threat of a financial crisis. That threat is incredible. Debt limit politics are completely asymmetrical among the parties, and so elimination strongly favors the left side of the aisle. And Dave is right about that. Completely right. Since Republicans can't agree on how to resolve this standoff, Democrats should roll up their asks into one. If Republicans kill the debt limit, they would get Democratic votes for a so-called clean, continuing resolution, which probably has to include disaster relief and an extension of the Farm Bill, all of which Trump has endorsed. The benefits of ending hostage-taking are pretty great, much higher than the small ball that Democrats had been seeking, and the final bill would perfectly line up with Trump's stated goals. Democrats aren't going to get a lot of wins in the Trump era. Getting one through the back door of the Biden era would be pretty great. I think Dave is completely right about that, but I want to go into a more complete treatment of the problem. I also want to say here that Trump seemed to be back today with other remarks that suggested that he only wanted to suspend the debt ceiling for 2 years. In other words, past the congressional elections of 2026. And then he would want it to come back to the table for further negotiations. But if the Democrats can get to the point of getting rid of the debt ceiling, it would end the hostage taking, and that would make politics far cleaner. No more terrorism over the debt, at least with respect to the debt ceiling. That would no longer be part of Washington politics, and that would be wonderful. But here, I want to get here. Yes, Elizabeth Warren did want to get rid of the debt ceiling. Didn't they try to sneak in a race? They did try to sneak in a race for Congress, but I think the Democrats can certainly cope with that over a period of time. Of course, it's fine for Trump and Musk to be big shots and to propose there should be no raise to congressional ceilings because they both are billionaires. Now, the Congress people, okay, are only millionaires. So for them to get a raise of 20,000 or 30,000, maybe that's more significant for them. Okay, but I just want to point out that Trump and Musk don't really care whether Congress gets a raise, okay, or doesn't get a raise. They're just showboating to the public on that. But now I want to go to the larger issue. And the larger issue is, what kinds of permanent cures for the debt ceiling can we have? This comes from a piece of mind called Permanent Cures for Debt Ceiling Crises. That's on my website at josephmfirestone.com. The blog post was written on January 28th, 2018. And there are basically 4 cures that I go through here for debt ceiling crises. The first is simple. Just repeal the debt ceiling law. The reason it was passed in 1917 to grant the executive greater spending flexibility while limiting war spending is now gone. Absolutely gone, folks. That's gone. That ship has passed. Also, the president is limited in spending to congressional appropriations and repaying debt instrument obligations of the United States. So the only rationale for retaining it is for one political party or the other to use it as a bargaining chip to get what it wants. And this is always, in the last 10 years, it's always been the Republicans using it as the bargaining chip, which is most often something that hurts many Americans. How long will it take to repeal? It'll probably take an afternoon, no more. So, and if people would say okay to Donald Trump, it would only take an afternoon. Just add that to the compromise bill. So why don't the Republicans, who have control of both houses and the presidency, well, they don't have control of the Senate yet, but they did when I wrote this in 2018, just do it and go ahead with the things they want to do. Because both parties like periodically to cry poverty and to pretend that the government is running out of money. Debt ceiling crises give them an opportunity to posture about the deficit and the debt, and then pivot to austerity policies that will please their donors. Then there's, of course, the second solution, permanent solution, is high-value platinum coin seigniorage. According to the U.S. Mint, and this is back in 2016, FY 2016 U.S. Mint estimated total revenues are $3,839,982,000. Total expenses are $3,595,307,000, of which $30,468,000 for capital investments, and net results are $244,675,000 in earnings. The Mint's earnings from seigniorage, also known as the coin seigniorage, or simply seigniorage, is the net profit from coining money and selling it to banks and private individuals. It's the difference between the cumulative face values of the coins it ships and the expenses it incurs in producing and shipping coins to their buyers, including operating, material, and capital expenses of the mint during 2016, or actually during any year. Of course, this is a generalized example. Both the face values and the seigniorage accumulate in the Mint's Public Enterprise Fund PEF account throughout the year. By the way, that happens today. It hasn't changed since 2016. The Treasury can, quote, sweep, unquote, the Public Enterprise Fund, the PEF, for the seigniorage into its own spending account, that is the Treasury General Account at the New York Fed, at will. So that is a way for the Treasury to get the Fed to mark up Treasury spending account, to mark up the reserves in the Treasury spending account. Compared to the credits to its spending account coming from other accounts holding revenue from taxing and selling bonds, the amount of coin seigniorage coming from the Mint is small. But it is there, and it demonstrates that there is another way the Treasury gets its spending account filled so it can spend congressional appropriations funding its spending. And as it turns out, that way of Treasury filling its spending account can be used to much greater effect than it has been used in the past. By using the authority of a 1996 law to mint proof platinum coins, these are 1 ounce proof platinum coins with arbitrary face values in the trillions of dollars, Treasury through the Mint can cause the Fed to fill the PEF, the Public Enterprise Fund, with enough reserves to allow it to use the resulting seigniorage to perform its already congressionally mandated spending, and even enough to pay off its existing debt. The idea, which originated with the Beowulf attorney Carlos Mucha, in its trillion-dollar coin TDC form, has gotten a lot of attention during the debt ceiling crisis of 2011 and 2012 to 2013. But a variation of it in its high-value platinum coin seigniorage form, requiring a coin with face value of $100 trillion, for example, has received much less attention. The differences in the TDC and HVPCS variations and their political implications are great. The TDC looks like a temporary expedient to get around debt ceiling problems, whose use can be repeated when needed. But it doesn't quickly remove the political problem of, quote, the national debt, unquote, from consciousness as one of our most serious political problems. On the other hand, minting a 100T coin would change the background of politics by providing for a relatively rapid payoff of the debt subject to the limit without balanced budget creating recessions. If such a coin were used, then there would be no more austerity talk and no questions about, quote, how you're going to pay for it, unquote, since one can always answer, quote, well, once Congress funds it, then Treasury can get reserves in its spending account from the Fed through transferring existing reserves in other accounts, including its PEF account previously filled with high-value platinum coin seigniorage, unquote. That is, the Treasury orders the Federal Reserve to increase the balance in the spending account by ordering the Mint to issue platinum coins when it wants to fill it and ship the coins to the Federal Reserve for deposit. Now, of course, if the Treasury can order the Federal Reserve to do this, well, of course, the President can order the Treasury Secretary to order the Federal Reserve to do this. Now, this is interesting because let us say Congress doesn't want to go along with President Trump's suggestions right now. Okay, let us say they don't want to go along with it. So let's say they insist on passing a bill that doesn't completely eliminate the debt ceiling law. Well, then President Trump can also negate it by minting $100 trillion platinum coin. That is, the Treasury orders the Federal Reserve to increase the balance in its spending account by ordering the Mint to issue platinum coins when it wants to fill it and ship the coins to the Federal Reserve for deposit. The coins then serve as a message, an order from Treasury to fill up the Mint's PEF account with reserves. Once that's done, Treasury can then send an order to the Fed to debit, mark down the PEF account for the value of the seigniorage, and credit, mark up the Treasury spending account in that exact amount. Just a footnote here, I've discussed high-value platinum coin seigniorage, HVPCS, at length in my book, in many posts at New Economic Perspectives, and on my current blog, covering the subject comprehensively. So if you're interested in more detailed information on HVPCS, then these are the places to go. So I'm going to enter now, comment here. I'm going to enter the link to my book on how that high-value platinum coin seigniorage. The main title of the book is Fixing the Debt, in case you want to know. And it's only in a Kindle version, and you can get it for $9.99. So, the third method, or the third permanent solution for a debt ceiling crisis, is overt congressional financing. So this is not something the president alone can make happen. This is something that requires the Congress to collaborate. And the way it works is a particular clause is needed, in every appropriations bill. And the language of that clause is here. But I'm going to very briefly shift away from the article and to a fancier version of the language that I have right here. This slide is called Create Overt Congressional Financing, and the way you do it is you just add 2 sentences to every money bill. You could add those 2 sentences to the CR that's being considered right now in Congress. The language is, upon passage of this appropriations bill, you would change that language, of course, because this bill is a continuing resolution rather than an appropriations bill, but that's easy to change. The Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account at the New York Federal Reserve with the addition to its reserve balance necessary to spend this appropriation. Of course, the continuing resolution does appropriate money. That's what it does. So it is a different kind of appropriation bill. In addition, the Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account with the additions to the Treasury reserve balances necessary to repay all outstanding debt instruments, including principal and interest, as they fall due for the fiscal year of this appropriation. Now notice, if this language were put into the bill, then a considerable amount of Treasury debt would be paid off between the passage of this bill and the end of the fiscal year. Just off the top of my head, probably $2 trillion of debt would be paid down. Yes, as much as that, okay, in a single year, because there's lots and lots and lots of short-term debt. So that gets, by the way, that gets us very much below the debt ceiling. Also, if next year Congress passes an appropriation bill and this clause were in it, then even more of the debt would be paid off. Even more of the debt would be paid off as we go forward. Until after 30 years, all the debt of the federal government would be paid off, as long as this boilerplate is in every money bill. So let me get back to the article here, my article. The first sentence ensures that in the event there is deficit spending in an appropriations bill, reserves would already exist in the Treasury spending account to allow Treasury to perform its mandated spending without further borrowing. So from the point the language is included in federal legislation, further Treasury borrowing to, quote, pay for, unquote, deficit spending will cease to exist. And then the second sentence ensures that reserves will already exist in the Treasury spending account to repay principal and interest on outstanding debt instruments as they fall due throughout the fiscal year of the appropriation. So from the point the language is passed, the Treasury debt will be in continuous decline until after 30 years it will be gone entirely. Let us call incorporation of this language in appropriations and CR bills over congressional financing, a fiscal policy, and associated deficit spending. What we have now, we can call in contrast implicit congressional financing. OCF is better than ICF. Overt congressional financing is better than implicit congressional financing, is that it is much more transparent and almost immediately will be much more popular with most people than ICF and its load of public debt instruments. So here, I point out that if this method were adopted by Congress, there would be no more need for debt ceiling laws, because the public debt instruments would be continuously getting paid off, and the public debt issue would be gone from our debates, except when businesses decided that they wanted some issuance of congressional debt, so they pressured the Congress to issue some congressional debt instruments. But still, we would have continuous paying down of the debt, and after 30 years, it would pretty much be gone. Within 6 months of passage, the legislation provided for overt congressional financing. Its effects will be visible enough for the public to see that, quote, the debt, unquote, is a dead political issue killed by the legislation, and for the more reflective among them to learn the lesson that the debt was never a bona fide financial issue, but always a political one caused by the failure of people to understand the fiscal power of a monetarily sovereign government to repay its own debt instruments as they fall due. At that point, and even before that, for many people, we will see the end of austerity politics, periodic debt ceiling crises, fiscal cliffs, sequesters, and budget crises. OCF directly ends debt ceiling crisis because the debt is no longer relevant, except as a constantly shrinking obligation that will be paid off as it falls due. As for fiscal cliffs, sequesters, and budget crises, their justification is primarily in the false claim that the U.S. is running out of money and must slow the growth of the national debt enough to allow the debt to GDP ratio to shrink so that we can't afford to implement the deficit spending that may be necessary to create full employment, pass Medicare for all, and do other things that a majority of the population supports heavily but does not insist upon in the face of supposed budget problems. There would be no fiscal cliffs, sequesters, or budget crises without the claim that there is a government budget constraint. Once we dispel that claim with OCF, these things will be gone with the wind, and a new set of hopefully more fruitful problems will emerge. I look forward to these new problems, the real problems posed by the need to win debates with conservatives about the likely real effects of fiscal policy for public purpose, rather than the faux problems of imaginary fiscal constraints giving rise to neoliberal austerity. They will be a great step forward for American democracy. So that's the third permanent solution to the debt ceiling crisis. Okay. Notice the effect of the second or third of these particular solutions. We have now Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk raging for austerity, for cuts to Social Security, for cuts here and there, for all kinds of cuts, okay, of the budget. Now, Donald Trump at this point, has been going along with that, kind of. He allows their ranting and raving, and he's given them a supposed department of government. Of course, it's not a department of government because it hasn't been created by the Congress as departments of governments have to be, but they're the supposed heads of the Department of Government Efficiency, which they are currently funding out of their own sources. Okay. But of course, their government efficiency is about taking funding away from things that most ordinary people want, cutting spending, not cutting spending on the military, not cutting spending on things like SpaceX, on Musk's contracts with the federal government, but cutting the spending that you and I rely upon for our safety net. Now, if the debt ceiling law simply gets eliminated, then that's going to be good because there won't be these debt ceiling crises. But there would still be the debt terrorists moaning and groaning about how high the debt is getting all the time. And there would be the political threat of the reimposition of the debt ceiling to supposedly control that. But if either solutions 2 or 3 were implemented, then the debt terrorism issue would be gone, absolutely gone. Now, with this Congress in place, and with the next Congress, I doubt that they're going to implement the third solution here, overt congressional financing, because then they'd be getting rid of the debt issue, which both sides like to have, okay, in some instance. But Trump has indicated that he wants to eliminate the debt issue. He thinks he can do that, by eliminating the debt ceiling. But that's not really the way to do that. The way for the president to do that, in the absence of congressional cooperation, is by using the second solution, which is the platinum coin solution. The platinum coin solution will allow the gradual payoff of all the debt that is subject to the limit. That will mean the debt issue will go away over a period of time, probably within 6 months, within 6 months of passage of the legislation, because people will see that the debt had been paid down by 500 billion or 1 trillion, or whatever it would be paid off in 6 months, maybe even the 2 trillion in 6 months. And it wouldn't be an issue for people anymore because obviously with the platinum coin in place and all that money in the Treasury spending account, the payments on the debt would basically be guaranteed without any shenanigans guaranteed to pay off, the national debt. So that's really the solution Trump ought to be embracing at this point. What he ought to do is he shouldn't be fighting with the Congress about this. Doesn't make any sense for him to fight with the Congress about this. What he should be doing is taking the compromise bill that was worked out by the Congress, sign the compromise bill, and as soon as he gets into office, he should be minting the $100 trillion coin and using the revenue from that to pay down the debt as time goes on. Then there won't be any need for austerity. There won't be any need for political fights that are targeted on taking things away from people. Trump could have his tax cuts, and he could also have the safety net. And there would be absolutely no problem with this. And after that was in place for 6 to 9 months or a year or something like that, he might even be able to get the Congress to use the third method, which is overt congressional financing, to build these two sentences into every money bill going forward forever. That's what I think Trump should be doing. But what's the fourth solution? That's something you probably can't get Congress to do at this point, but I'll go over it anyway. Making the Fed an agency within the Treasury Department. When Congress created the Federal Reserve in 1913, progressives and many others believed that the Fed could be staffed by technocrats who would be unbiased and who could be trusted to perform the vital functions of the Fed in a way that was fair and even-handed. But over the years, faith in technocrats has vastly eroded, and the legitimacy of the Fed has been undermined, in part because its, quote, independence, unquote, from Wall Street interests is seen by many as a myth. The great crash of 2008 and its aftermath have heightened suspicions about who the Fed actually works for. They have strengthened the conviction that it works for Wall Street alone and never for Main Street. After all, where was the $30 trillion plus worth of credit facilities for mortgage holders on Main Street that the Fed supplied to Wall Street and the big banks to bail them out? In addition, the feeling is spreading among the American people that the established institutions are corrupt, and what is lacking is much more bottom-up democracy and much less trust in these institutions and their officials to fix them. So in this, a time of coming progressive change, I hope, but I doubt this for a while anyway, it is time to consider once again whether the U.S. needs an independent, quote-unquote, central bank run by technocrats and accountable only to Congress, or a central bank under the president, which would be accountable to the people through the president's accountability as well as accountable through Congress. Raising that question leads to another, even older one. Did the Congress, in creating the Fed, exceed its constitutional authority? The Constitution provides for only 3 branches of government and for only one supreme executive for the American people. But there is the Fed with its board of governors and its chairperson, clearly an executive agency of the federal government, supposedly serving the people and the public purpose, but, quote, independent, unquote, of the authority of the United States. On the face of it, that arrangement is unconstitutional and should be ended through Congress reorganizing the Fed under the Treasury and nationalizing the regional banks. Now I raise the question, which of these, quote, permanent cures should Democrats push for at this junction of history? Repealing the debt limit law seems like the easiest fix from a purely political point of view, and evidently that's what Trump is asking for, and it would end debt ceiling crises. But it would not remove debt terrorism from the political sphere. The debt terrorists would still be using the size of the debt to oppose progressive fiscal policy, and they would probably still be successful at imposing deficit reduction as the aim of fiscal policy. Removing the debt limit removes one rationale for government shutdowns, but there is still another available: failure of the two parties to agree on a budget because they both agree on deficit reduction, but not on the mix of tax cuts and spending. And worst of all, the background of rising debt will continue to fuel the austerity politics that has been most responsible for the decline of democracy in America. The second solution, using high-value platinum coin seniors, would remove debt ceiling crises and eventually the debt itself from the political table, freeing up available policy space for the advance of progressive fiscal policy. But there is one problem. The president has to order the Secretary of the Treasury to mint a 1-ounce platinum coin with a face value high enough to provide for ending the debt. However, there is little possibility right now I wrote this back in 2016. However, there is little possibility right now, in 2018, I should say, that Donald Trump will do that, since his party, after passing its huge tax cuts, plans to cut entitlements, pleading that the government can't afford them due to the size of the national debt. But now, Donald Trump won't have passed those huge tax cuts yet. So, maybe he has an incentive to pass the $100 trillion coin. Then he wouldn't have to fight over entitlements. He could pass his huge tax cuts without having to cut entitlements. I think politically, that would be a much cleaner course for him, a much better course for him, and one that would diffuse quite a lot of the opposition from the Democrats that at this point he's likely to face. Of course, the third permanent cure is overt congressional financing. It shares the advantage of ending the debt ceiling crisis and also removing the debt issue from politics with the HVPCS solution. But it too is politically infeasible because the Republican Congress will not at this juncture give up its debt ceiling weapon against programs favored by the Democrats in Congress. Lastly, there is the cure of reorganizing the Fed under the Treasury. This is the best constitutional solution to the problem of debt ceiling crisis and the existence of debt, but it is also the one that the Republican Congress is most unlikely to support. So none of the permanent cures is feasible or likely right now, but I take that back. Maybe the HVPCS solution may be more likely right now, because maybe Trump could stop fighting with the Congress over their solution at this point, wait till he gets into office on January 20th, and then mint the $100 trillion coin. But what happens if the Republicans lose both houses of Congress in 2018? I said it. It's no longer 2018, this may happen, but it might happen in 2026. Then I say, depending on how progressive the new Congress is, change may be possible. The most likely change, if it still exists, is repealing the debt limit law, since intense public pressure might be great enough to both move the Congress and the president to at least put an end to the damaging politics of debt ceiling crises. So I think I'm going to end this there. Okay, at this point, I think I've said enough. I say more in the post, but that was in the context of the politics we had in 2018. And we have entirely different politics, right now. Monica Augustine is here and says hello. Hello, Monica. Very nice to see you. Jeff Denton is here. Rocco is looking for hope like everyone else. But it's illegal to bribe no matter who. Government includes the Clintons and Trump. FFS. Jeffrey Denton says face palm. It may be illegal to bribe the government in some way, but it looks like uh, in various ways Elon Musk is getting ready to bribe the government over a period of years. And it seems like these days it's pretty easy to bribe the government, which brings us back to dump the corruption. Uh, we haven't talked about, dump the corruption for very long, but as we watch the formation, okay, of this new administration, and we look at all the corruption in it and all the payoffs to people who gave big contributions to the Trump administration, we see that this administration is thoroughly corrupt and is a perfect response to the bribery. That is, the bribers have actually been selected to be in the government. Robert Copeland says Rocco was praising Trump, Elon Musk, and Vivek just today. Yeah, I know Rocco is in love with Elon Musk. He's not worried about the fascism. He's just there. He's, making money on the market right now. And I think that's his primary concern. I'm not going to go on a rant against the people who invest in the market at this point, because my own daughter, Devora, also plans to do considerable investing in the market as time goes on. So I'm not going to rant and rave. The market is what it is. I'm afraid it's here to stay. I think what we can best do with respect to the market is to clean it up. But I think I am done for right now. I have said everything I want to say. Does anyone know whether Dee was able to clean up her technical problems and get on tonight? Because if she has done that, then I will join her. Okay. I don't see that Dee show is on. She must not be having a show tonight due to the technical difficulties that she was having. I don't think she has sent me anything. Let's see. Nope, I don't see anything from her. So I'm thinking Dee is not having a show tonight. Does anybody know if I'm right about that? Well, in any case, I can't go to any such show because I don't have a StreamYard link. So I guess it's time for me to say goodnight. I will be back on Saturday night. I'll probably be back with another show dealing solely, with international politics. If it remains quiet, I may just do that on Saturday night. Or, I may go on with another show on fiscal policy. So Monica's saying good night. And Lana Dell Hates the Clock is also saying good night. So thank you, Lana, for coming. Thank you all for coming. And I will see you all on Saturday night at 9 p.m. If, as the old saying goes, the creeks don't rise. And Bonnie's smiling at that. Okay, good night, everybody. Oh, Lana says, tell people about your books. Okay, I will then take the opportunity to tell people about my various books. Let me go to okay. Let me go to back to my. I'll go back to my website. Uh, Give me just a moment here. Okay. So, I didn't plan on doing this, so it'll take me a minute to set it up. Where is everything? Ah, yeah, here are my books. Okay. Now, these are books mainly dealing, okay, with MMT. First category is books on economics, politics, fiscal policy, and trade. My first book, all these books are ebooks, is Fixing the Debt Without Breaking America, Austerity, the $1 trillion Coin, and Ending Debt Ceiling, Sequester, and Budgetary Crises. I originally wrote this book in 2013, early in 2013. I revised it early in 2014 and added a very lengthy appendix expanding the number of methods for getting money into the federal spending account. This book is the first and still only book on platinum coin seigniorage and the $1 trillion coin. Okay, I published it in early March of 2013 and updated it in January of 2014. The book was motivated by the legislative battle to pass trade promotional. I'm sorry. I guess I don't have the full blurb on it here. The blurb on the book is at the link. I'm not really yet set up to do that, but maybe that wasn't what I wanted after all. Oh, this is speaking topics. I haven't been on my website for a very long time, so I'm not as familiar with it as I once was. I set it up to do this conveniently, but I'm no longer sure about my setup. Okay, so, all right. I'm going to make use of Amazon to do it then. Okay, so here's the description on Amazon. This book is about a counter narrative to austerity politics. It exposes its fallacies and I hope its closed-mindedness and futility. It also offers a way out of austerity politics. That way out is through the perspectives and truths developed by the approach to economics called variously modern money theory, MMT, also known as modern monetary theory or neo-chartalism, and it is also through using the method of high-value platinum coin seigniorage. In this book, I relate neoliberalism, the Washington Consensus, and austerity politics to the perspectives and truths of MMT, including MMT ideas about fiscal sustainability and responsibility, and to HVPS and its promising application to ending austerity by providing the Treasury Department with the capability to harness the Federal Reserve's power to create bank reserves out of thin air. The Treasury can use this capability to repay the national debt and to deficit spend congressional appropriations. Well, why would you want to deficit spend congressional appropriations? Let's consider that for a minute. Well, the reason why you would want to do that, a very fundamental reason, is that when government deficit spends, it leaves net financial assets. It contributes net financial assets to the non-government sector. When government runs a surplus, however, it takes net financial assets out of the private sector. So generally speaking, with a growing population, you would want to deficit spend and add more money to the non-government sector. When you do this, it also decreases the conflict, in the non-government sector, because there's more money to go around. One big problem with austerity is that it can induce vicious conflict over net financial assets into the non-government sector. When the pie of net financial assets is not increasing, the motivation to take someone else's net financial assets and put it into your pocket is far greater. When net financial assets are expanding, on the other hand, perhaps there can be a lesser degree of greed in the system. That's just one very general point one can make. I'll go on with the description. If used, HVPS would end the possibility of repeated and further debt ceiling crises, and would also remove any reasonable justifications referring to the current national debt deficit situation for the sequester. The sequester was very current in 2013, or for the upcoming budgetary crisis, which the Republicans intend to create at the end of March and then repeat periodically throughout this year and probably next. Actually, they created it periodically over the next 10 years. In brief, this book offers a solution to the damaging deadlock we see in Congress and between Congress and the executive that periodically hurts our economy and harms our recovery from the crash of 2008. The proposed solution here, $60 trillion high-value platinum coin solution, high-value platinum coin seigniorage, would be entirely game-changing for Washington politics. Yes, I suggested in 2013 a $60 trillion solution and not a $100 trillion solution. But I became persuaded by Stephanie Kelton that it was much more catchy to suggest a $100 trillion solution, which is what I always do now. It would put the advocates of austerity politics literally out of business. forced them to create a whole new rationale for opposing measures that the economy and the American people need. Okay, the next part goes through the table of contents in the book. The contents includes austerity, but neoliberalism, and fiscal responsibility, a narrative on fix the debt and a counter-narrative on fixing the debt, modern monetary truths, real meaning of deficit and surplus, the national debt and national savings, two ways of fixing the debt without breaking America. And those two ways, okay, fixing the debt, there are now four ways, which I just gave you. And the reason why I had only two ways of fixing the debt is at that time I hadn't thought of overt congressional financing yet. So there's also a chapter on the origin and early history of platinum coin seigniorage. That chapter, of course, is outdated now because there's been more history. Then a discussion of the $1 trillion coin and debt ceiling crisis. The coin hitting the mainstream, incremental versus small ball versus game-changing PCS. The $60 trillion plan, policy space, and the end of austerity. And then the discussion is platinum coin seigniorage inflationary? And the answer is not in itself. It's not in itself inflationary. Then legal, political, economic, and institutional objections to high-value coin seigniorage, high-value coins and MMT, the promise of high-value platinum coin seigniorage for America, no more debt ceiling, sequester, or budgetary crises, and more. The second edition revises the first and adds a new postscript chapter, updating the politics of the continuing debt ceiling conflicts between the two major U.S. political parties. So that's the description of that particular book. That's one of my two most important books, okay, I think. But I'm going to go to a second one, which I think is very, very important now also, and read you the blurb from Amazon on that book. Remember, all my books are Kindle books. Okay, the United States has run trade deficits for nearly 40 years now. Many are convinced that this is the primary factor explaining the migration of American jobs overseas, a stagnant economy, and our accelerating levels of inequality. A balanced trade policy, reducing trade deficits to near zero, will, it is claimed, support lower unemployment by keeping good jobs here, drive wages up rather than down, be more sustainable, and one, contribute to a collapse of the global economy. But there is an important truth of macroeconomics to be considered. Quote, exports are real costs and imports are real benefits, unquote. That's a quote from the originator of MMT, specifically Warren B. Mosler. So the issue is, would we rather send fiat money to other nations and add to our real wealth in return? Or would we rather add to their real wealth and get their fiat money or our old fiat money back in return? Other things being equal, we prefer the first alternative rather than the second. Trade deficits are better than trade surpluses, at least in the short run. Other things are not equal, however, since if the government is running trade deficits, does nothing to compensate for their shorter and longer term effects, then these will create a political reaction destabilizing any trade policy, resulting in continuous trade deficits. However, their negative effects can be avoided without implementing, quote, balanced trade as a continuous policy. How that can be done is the subject of this book. It looks at trade policy in the broader context of budgetary and fiscal policy and the relations among the foreign, domestic, private, and government sectors of the economy. And since the trade balance impacts the private sector and the government balance, It argues for an integrated view of trade and fiscal policy in relation to public purpose, and also proposes changes to government institutions to facilitate integrated trade and fiscal policy. The book analyzes and critiques free trade policy, balanced trade policy, including the proposal of Warren Buffett, three types of fair trade policy, trade for public purpose policy, impact assessment for trade policy, balanced budget fiscal policy, deficit neutrality in the long run fiscal policy, the budgeting for public purpose fiscal policy, a holistic approach to trade and fiscal policy, and a critique of the current trade deals. At the time I wrote that book, there were 3 current trade deals that were pending. They were all bad. Finally, the concluding chapter presents the book's many conclusions, including some about the pending trade deals being negotiated by the Obama administration and an agenda relating fiscal and trade policies to public purpose. That agenda calls for much larger levels of deficit spending by the federal government than we have now, and it contends the continuous budget deficits are both necessary and desirable for the foreseeable future. So, you can see from that summary that this book is very relevant to concerns now, because among the major concerns of the incoming Trump administration is to cut back on our trade deficits, and to do it in various ways. Now, last stream, I went over the Yanis Varoufakis article suggesting that Trump's plans to cut the trade deficit in various ways would be very damaging to the economy. Elon Musk is also calling for things like that, but the kind of austerity that would entail would bring the prosperity of America to a crashing halt. It would be terrible. But the kind of trade policy I suggest here in this book and lay out in this book is exactly the kind of trade policy that would be consistent with the public purpose, and so would remove the risk of collapse, and would look to adding to fiscal well-being by creating full employment, but through subsidization and creation of new industries. So I think you might want to pick up this book. It contains some very novel things, including the harmonization of trade policy and foreign policy with our domestic policy, and the same ideas of public purpose would be applied to foreign policy, and to domestic policy in order to harmonize the two. Today, we do not have a harmonization of both these areas of policy. We have contradictions instead. These are contradictions that lead us to war, and contradictions over a long period of time that would lead us to poverty. So this book outlines kind of a general solution to all that. Of course, the devil is in the details, and when I get some more time, I'll write up a lot of the details, but that's the reason why this book is very important, or why I believe it's a very important book. Okay, so there are a lot of other books to look at. Here's a Kindle book called Declarations of Dependence, Trade, Tyranny, Sovereignty, and Democracy. This book discusses a range of issues surrounding the 3 trading agreements being negotiated by the Obama administration, numerous nations around the world. Uses a critical approach to consider them, and especially the recently passed Trade Promotion Authority and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, places special emphasis on the likely governmental impacts of the trade agreements, and also talks about the potential development of fascism arising at the national level due to the influence of global corporate rule and other governmental issues. Okay, there are a number of concrete things in this book. This book is actually quite dated because the same issues are not actually to the forefront now, because neoliberal justifications for trade have faded, in importance, and the trade agreements that were actually negotiated by the Trump administration were less onerous than the trade agreements that the Obama administration was trying to negotiate. But I think this book is still very interesting to read as background for the Balanced Budget and Balanced Trade book, which actually came later. So those are three of my books. The fourth one is this book called Fiscal Myths of the 2016 Campaign. This book is kind of a catalog of fiscal myths dealing with something like, I guess it's 36 or 37 of them. The description is here. Most of the world, and most notably the United States, is in the grip of fiscal myths fostered by the ideology of neoliberalism. There is virtual unanimity across the major political parties in the United States in accepting the viewpoint of neoliberalism and the fiscal myths associated with it. This book is about these myths, the arguments showing that they are indeed myths and the truths that can counter them. It is about campaign 2016 and some of its issues. Okay, by the way, this was written before the 2016 campaign was ended, because the fiscal myths will certainly be used in the campaign, since for the first time in a very long time, there is a major party candidate running who, because he advocates for a very broad agenda and for fighting inequality, will sooner or later find that some and perhaps a large number of fiscal myths are being directed at him by his opponents and their supporters, who want to persuade voters that his agenda is fiscally irresponsible. The process of using fiscal myths to undermine Senator Sanders' message has already begun with an attack by the Wall Street Journal on key elements of his program. The attack was easily turned aside by progressive supporters who showed that the fiscal proposals being criticized as, quote, fiscally responsible, unquote, was sure to net save at least $5 trillion rather than cost $18 trillion over a decade, as the WSJ was claiming, because they would replace current expensive programs and deliver huge out-of-pocket savings for Americans. But attacks on other proposed fiscal policies in the infrastructure, climate protection, and job creation areas on the Senator's agenda are sure to intensify in coming weeks. So to summarize this, this was an exacting exploration of the fiscal myths that had arisen since 1971. There were myths about running out of money, government debt, the burden of government debt, the government family or household, spending too much, inflation and hyperinflation, shared sacrifice and government austerity, our economic future. Also myths concerning the nature of money, fiscal responsibility myths, and concludes with the comparison of fiscal myths and fiscal truths. Now, even though this book was Fiscal Myths of 2016, the same things apply to Fiscal Myths 2020 and to Fiscal Myths in 2024. This book is not a dated book at all. The myths are still with us. They have not been dispelled by time, and they haven't been dispelled by the methods, by the efforts of MMTers, okay, to dispel them, most notably by Stephanie Kelton, okay, in her book on called The Deficit Myth, of course. But as compared with the deficit myth, This book is more comprehensive in the number of fiscal myths that it actually treats. Stephanie's book is beautifully written and has been wonderful in helping to dispel some of the major fiscal myths. But this book, of mine, as I say, is much more comprehensive in outlining fiscal myths. It's not been read by too many people. There's only one review of it, okay, on Amazon. But I think it's a great book, still very relevant, and I urge you all to take a look at it. Okay, so that goes through four of my books. Let me go down further. I wrote also two books that deal with the fiscal responsibility. The first book was called Real Fiscal Responsibility, Volume 1, The Progressive Give Up Formula. Now, I think this book is really a very, very good book too, but it's gotten very little exposure. It was, of course, Volume 1 of a two-volume series. It concentrated on the progressive give up formula in Washington, D.C. Both of these books concentrate on Washington politics, both this first one, Volume 1, and Volume 2 as well, which we'll cover in just a minute. This book is Volume 1 of a two-volume series critiquing austerity politics at the federal level in the United States. It exposes its fallacies, its closed-mindedness and futility, and especially its reliance on wrong-headed conceptions of fiscal sustainability and fiscal responsibility. In this volume, I relate neoliberalism, the Washington consensus, austerity politics pushed by the powers that be among the D.C. village progressives, and the ideas of fiscal sustainability and fiscal responsibility. I relate that to the perspectives of modern money theory, including MMT-based ideas about fiscal sustainability and responsibility. I also explain what I mean by real fiscal responsibility rather than faux fiscal responsibility. I apply these ideas to analysis of the U.S. government during the term of Jimmy Carter. I begin my analysis of current progressive ideas and activities by examining the views of Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and then continue by analyzing the operation of the give-up formula among congressional and D.C. perspectives during the period 2009 and 2010, when the Democrats had big margins in Congress. Okay. I then move to the period 2011 to the present. And the present at this time was, when I wrote this, was 2016. Next, I analyzed the Campaign for the American Future and its new populism campaign, then conclude by relating the give-up formula to real fiscal responsibility. So that's what this first book, was about. I then have a description here of my second book, but I will now move to the second book and talk about what that one was about. The title of that book was Real Fiscal Responsibility, Volume 2, The Peterson Network, Inequality, and the Failure of Neoliberalism. This book is Volume 2 of a two-volume series critiquing austerity politics at the federal level in the United States. It completes the analysis begun in Volume 1 of its fallacies, its closed-mindedness and futility, and especially, let me expand the type on this. Okay. Especially its reliance on wrong-headed conceptions of fiscal sustainability and fiscal responsibility. Volume 1 focused on the role of progressives in quote, the village, unquote, defined by the Washington, New York political, economic, and communications elites in supporting macroeconomic austerity and the ideological framings governing fiscal debates and also negotiations carried out within those firms. In Volume 2, the focus is on the primary network at the center of faux fiscal responsibility activities in that same, quote, village, unquote. In turn, the center of that network is the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, incorporated in 2007, which also is still currently operating and spreading its poison into the DC networks. Volume 2 continues the analysis by focusing on PGPF activities, especially on its annual fiscal summits. It details and provides commentary on analysis of the views of the highly placed people who participated in them, including former President Clinton, Democratic and Republican congressional leaders, highly visible news personalities from the media, and financial leaders in government and business, and on how the orientation of their fiscal summits has evolved to adjust to changes in the political climate since the first summit in 2010. The pattern and remarkable bipartisan unity of these views is shown, as is the way they provide a faux fiscal sustainability, fiscal responsibility, ideological frame for debates and action in the realm of fiscal policy. Then, based on the summits and other important activities of the foundation, the outlines of PGPF network are drawn, showing its remarkably broad scope, both in and out of government, and its likely influence in fiscal policy making. After the network is identified and its scope and likely influence indicated, the record of the austerity policies it is advocated for and implemented is reviewed. Its primary claims of the effectiveness are shown to be at variance with the facts and have no basis other than the intuitions and faith of their partisans. Well, I could go on with this volume, but I think you get the idea. The idea was to generate a counter-narrative from both critical and positive perspectives, the counter-narrative based on modern monetary theory. Another purpose was to relate things to the public purpose, and then also to address the problem of inequality and to relate it to the extremely important work of Thomas Piketty in his famous book, Capital. Finally, the new counter-narrative is used again to show that a commitment to real fiscal responsibility also entails one to a comprehensive agenda fiscal policy, making full use of the expanded policy space provided by that commitment. That agenda is one that reclaims the future of American democracy and the heritage of the New Deal, the Fair Deal, and the Great Society. It is one that combines them all in a Green New Deal that will secure and extend U.S. democracy in all its dimensions, and also FDR's unfinished business, his economic Bill of Rights. So that's what those two volumes were about. So I still think those two volumes are very important. They're very important for people who concentrate on DC politics, but they're very important also when it comes to an understanding of what our fiscal policy ought to be. So I think they're very important in that respect. All these books are $9.99. They're all Kindle books. There are two more books. We can briefly go over them. In other words, altogether, there are a total of 8 books. 7 books applying MMT perspectives to things, and 1 book dealing with risk, which I'll get into in just a moment. But this book, Austerity, Greece's Debt Crisis, and the Theft of Democracy, was written in the early summer of 2015. And here's a description of that. The Eurozone is an instrument of the globalization process that is setting financial elites over all nations of the world, including the democracies. By the way, that's less of a problem now than it was, but it's still a problem. The conflict is going on between those in favor of the globalization process and those in favor of the rise of multipolarity. But going on, the situation in Greece exposes the true nature of the Eurozone institutions as a naked fact beyond spinning for all to see. They are popular sovereignty thieves and democracy killers with the illegitimate power necessary to shut down democratic governments. The architectural flaw in the Maastricht Treaty, namely that nations of Europe were giving up their monetary sovereignty, was immediately recognized as fatal by acute economists, especially the MMT economists, and mainly predicted failure. But what was not seen clearly were the political implications of giving the ECB and the Troika the ability to deny liquidity to the banking systems of nations, and in so doing to crash their banking institutions, undermine their governments, and perform essentially coups d'etat, rendering elected governments of democratic nation states powerless to enact policies they were elected to pass. This, quote, theft of democracy, unquote, contradicts the basic commitment of the EU to advance democracy. It steals from the peoples of the nations of Europe what was so hard won by many of them only recently. This book provides a detailed narrative about the proceedings of a panel of well-known economists convened by Senator Sanders at the Hart Senate Office Building on June 30th, 2015, on the Greek debt crisis and its implications for austerity, the Eurozone, the looming crisis in Puerto Rico, and democracy. The panel session, including introductory speeches by Senator Sanders, Greece's ambassador to the United States, and panel presentations by economist Joseph E. Stiglitz, of course a Nobel Prize winner, Jacob Funk Kierkegaard, and James K. Galbraith. The panel was moderated by Stephanie A. Kelton. The book also provides a detailed analysis and commentary on panel presentations and the Q&A period. It concludes with chapters on uncooperative, quote, Grexit, unquote, information technology problems of Grexit, and the death of democracy. So that's what that particular book is about. It was written actually early in the process of my writing these various books. I started out in the late spring of 2015 with the Declarations of Dependence book. I went on to write the book on Greece, okay, and austerity. That was actually the second book I wrote. The third book I wrote, I believe, was campaigns, fiscal myths of campaigns for 2016. Then I wrote the fourth book, which is Who Needs Balanced Trade? Who Needs Balanced Budgets? So of the 7 books on MMT, 6 of them were written between 2015 and 2016. The 7th was written back in 2013 and revised in 2014. I haven't written, I wrote only one book since the 7 books, okay, on MMT, because frankly, the books were getting very little attention. Therefore, I wanted to turn to streaming because I thought I would have a much bigger influence by streaming, which I believe I have had. So I think that sort of worked out. But anyway, let me go to the last of the books I published in the 2015 to 2016 period. This is a more generalized book. The title of it is Riskonomics, Reducing Risk by Killing Your Worst Ideas. I actually wrote the draft of this in my pre-MMT period when I was doing work, okay, in knowledge management, but I did not actually publish it, okay, until February of 2016. It was the last book I released in the period from 2015 to 2016, and the last book, okay, I've written a total of 11 books altogether. books in knowledge management preceding the ones at MMT. Anyway, what this book is about is as follows. Risk is something we live with every day. It is part of our being alive. Every living thing has expectations, and when it acts on those expectations, it risks error because nothing living is infallible. Any one of our expectations may be wrong at any time. None of us is so wise or so favored or so skilled or so wealthy or so lucky that we can avoid error and the risk of it. Since the 21st century began, the top executives of Enron, Lucent, Arthur Andersen, Lehman Brothers, and Bear Stearns, and remember, I was writing this from the perspective of the first decade of the 2000s, realized to their lasting regret that they risked and suffered consequences they never imagined were a real possibility at the time they made the various decisions that destroyed or severely damaged their companies. The quote, neocons, quote, both in the Bush administration and outside it, and by the way, in the Obama administration and the later Trump administration, uh, okay, and the later Biden administration, urged the U.S. intervention in Iraq and in other places, of course, like in Ukraine and in Syria, and they're still doing their interventions in Libya, of course, and provided estimates of its likely costs ranging from 0 to 1.7 billion. In testimony to Congress, estimated costs are over 2 trillion and projected to rise to 4 trillion. By the way, I think they're now calculated at 7 trillion. That the intervention in Iran has cost 7 trillion, and there is no end in sight of either these Iraqi or alliance casualties or the growth of anti-Americanism and terrorist recruitment in the Muslim world resulting from the intervention. By the way, the terrorists in the Muslim world are still at work, as we see. They brought down, with the aid of the Turkish intelligence organizations and the CIA, they brought down the Syrian regime just a few weeks ago. Recent history prior to the crash of 2008 is about people taking risks they did not know they were taking and losing out, indeed losing big. In business, all eyes are focused on risk, and risk assessment and risk management are more important than they have ever been. Now the world economy hangs in the balance as the financial sector continues to engage in risky behavior after legislatures and nation after nation failed to enact laws sufficient to remove the derivatives market and other risky and fraudulent practices from the financial landscape. And all this is why a conversational overview on risk and how to reduce it, such as this one, is needed so badly right now. And by the way, it's still so badly needed right now. There are a lot of technical books in the market on risk and risk management emphasizing formal and financial approaches to risk. But I don't know of any works that focus on the risk of error and decision models in language that people will be able to both read quickly and easily assimilate. This is a short book, roughly 30,000 words, and it is quick and inexpensive reading for the trade market of books on business and other forms of organization. So, how can decision makers reduce risk? How can they recognize when they have problems of unanticipated risks in their decision models? How can they tell whether they've accurately assessed risk and whether decisions they are thinking about have high risks? How can they prioritize risks? How can they create processes and systems that would help them to reduce risks? How can they assess the ability of their organizations relative to their competition to solve problems in alternative areas of risks they're considering entering? Why is reducing the risk of errors by killing your worst ideas a hard thing to do? The goal of riskonomics, reducing risk by killing your worst ideas, is to answer these questions in a way that can be easily understood and acted upon. It tells people how to reduce risk, particularly in business, by using both creative learning and critical thinking. This book is for everyone who makes decisions. It explains how an organization can learn how to reduce risk in its decision-making by taking the approach of surfacing problems, creating new decision models, and killing its worst ideas through critical exchange. It provides in a book short enough for an airline flight, both a new approach and practical advice for business, government, nonprofit, non-governmental, and supranational organizations about how to reduce risk in decision making and a general approach to reducing risk, in everyday life. So there we are. Lana requested that I go over my books. So I'm sure I'm now giving you much more information than I can use, than you can use. But you are, there's still, but most of you here, there are only 23 of you as far as I could see from the indicator here tonight, but there are 22 of you here now, so I guess I didn't bore you too much with my going over the books. So I forgot to share my screen, though, I guess. Okay, Lana says, glad you went into some of your books. I went into many of my books. I didn't go into my knowledge management books. I wish you would revisit how we are quickly sliding into fascism internally, including Amazon protesters in New York City being arrested, Luigi being charged on the state and federal level, etc. Very scary. Would you just say briefly that Dave Garibaldi and I are scheduled to go live on the Willie Bragg Show on Monday to discuss healthcare? He has a YouTube channel, aka Dirty Dirtbag Leftist. Hope to see everyone. I certainly support what Dave Garibaldi and Lana are doing. She says they're scheduled to go live on Willie Bragg Show on Monday to discuss healthcare. And again, he has a YouTube channel, also known as, quote, Dirtbag Leftist, unquote. So, okay, I guess you could Google on YouTube or search on Google for the Willie Bragg Show. Okay, and you can get there. What time on Monday are you scheduled to go live? Dee says, I'm still here listening. I'm still here listening. I'm still here listening. Well, thank you, Dee. Thank you very much. And okay, Lana, would you please give us the time? Because you did not give us the time. Okay, I will. Lana says, should be at 5 p.m. Eastern. So look for Willie Bragg's channel, and it will be at 5 p.m. Eastern. She says, no, 6 p.m. Eastern. So it will be at 6 p.m. Eastern. So, but thank you all for coming. I think that does it for me tonight. I will be back on Saturday night, and I hope that Dee will also be back on Saturday night, and I will be back at 9 p.m. Lana says, Willie is Eastern, and we are on Central. Yes, so it's 6 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, Lana, very much. And thank you all for coming. Good night for now. I will see you on Saturday, okay, at 9. Oh, and don't forget my patreon.com, please. And don't forget also my Buy Me a Coffee, which is flashing across the bottom of the screen right now. And I will see you all on Saturday. Thank you again.